Direct from CBS News Convention Headquarters in Chicago, this is the CBS Evening News with Walter Cronkite and Charles Kuralt in the CBS Newsroom in New York, Eric Severide in Chicago, John Lawrence in Chicago, Peter Kalisher in Prague, and Tony Sargent in Phu Loy, South Vietnam.
Good evening for the last time from our CBS News Convention anchor booth in Chicago's International Amphitheater. Hubert Humphrey today began trying to put the Democratic Party back together, or at least patch it up, following a series of convention floor fights and Chicago street fights which clouded his easy first ballot nomination last night. Late this afternoon, he called a news conference to announce his vice presidential choice.
Ladies and gentlemen and my fellow Americans, I come to this platform to tell you that I shall recommend to the National Convention, the Democratic Party, for the office of Vice President, very distinguished United States Senator, and I think one of the most capable, experienced, and able men in government today. He is the United States Senator from Maine, Mr. Edmund Muskie.
Muskie, 54, has been in the Senate since 1959. He's regarded as one of the Senate's most skillful lawmakers. A Roman Catholic of Polish descent, Muskie put Humphrey's name in nomination before the convention last night and showed something of his speaking style and his public personality.
Sometimes in the emotion of the debate on Vietnam, we overemphasize our differences and ignore our wide areas of agreement. No responsible leader wants unilateral withdrawal. None seeks to escalate the war. All major participants in this debate seek a negotiated political settlement.
That was Muskie speaking on the Vietnam debate yesterday afternoon. Before Humphrey can sally forth against the Republicans, he must deal with the reaction within his own party to his candidacy, to the platform that he's going to run upon, and the violence related to both in downtown Chicago. Humphrey's chief challenger for the nomination, Senator Eugene McCarthy, congratulated the vice president on his nomination, but he withheld any pledge of support. A late starter for the nomination, Senator George McGovern, offered lukewarm endorsement of Humphrey, but said that he and his supporters now would work to change the vice president's thinking about Vietnam. Party conservatives doubted that Humphrey could carry the South against the candidacies of George Wallace and Richard Nixon. Party liberals said Humphrey might not do well in other parts of the country because of the hawkish Vietnam plank in the party's platform. Dissidents threatened to sit out the campaign altogether, and there's even a fledgling movement underway to start a fourth party.
I'd like you to meet a handsome family. This is Millie, our pride and joy, and these are her two sons. What characters. You know, I've brought up a lot of dogs, and I'm often asked about feeding. Everybody knows dogs need meat. Alpo is 100% meat, and that's why so many veterinarians recommend Alpo. With most other dog foods, you don't know where the meat leaves off and the cereal begins. That's because most dog foods are mainly cereal. That's right, mainly cereal. Some up to 70% cereal. Not Alpo. Alpo is 100% meat, not a speck of cereal. Here, Millie, ladies first. My dogs like all 6 kinds. Alpo beef, chicken, horse meat, liver, lamb, and veal. They cost a little more, naturally. Meat costs more than cereal. See what happens to your dog when you switch him to Alpo.
Leaders of the anti-war demonstrators here today condemned Humphrey's selection and urged their followers to return home and work against the vice president's election. The protesters have been prevented from marching toward the amphitheater. The clashes have occurred 5 miles away in downtown Chicago, outside the Democrats' headquarters hotel. There was serious violence there last night, and Jack Lawrence reports.
A noisy but non-violent crowd jammed the streets as Chicago police charged suddenly in all directions. They jabbed nightsticks into stomachs and skulls, battering demonstrators and bystanders who were hopelessly trapped on sidewalks, in panic, with nowhere to run. Many of the 300 injured were attacked as they stood quietly watching the waves of police charge the protesters in the streets. They included visiting conventioneers, McCarthy campaign workers, and other onlookers. For more than an hour, police charged into the demonstrators. But each time they were dispersed, they gathered together again and began to fight back. "29 policemen were injured, struck by missiles thrown from the streets and hotel rooms by angry guests. More than 250 persons were arrested in the running battle that spread from the hotel area into the downtown loop. The charge, disorderly conduct for blocking traffic in the streets, resisting arrest, and assaulting the police. Throughout the attack, the protesters cried out, 'Sieg Heil,' and 'the streets belong to the people.' A policeman shouted, 'Up against the wall.' Several hundred delegates who had been at Convention Hall were so angered by police action that they staged a 3 a.m. march from the amphitheater to the scene of the bloodshed. It was the march in reverse that had been denied to the demonstrators. One of them remarked, 'Your Mayor Daley has killed the Democratic Party.' The violence stopped when police and National Guardsmen allowed the demonstrators to gather in Grant Park across the street from the hotel. When Guardsmen relieved the police who had cleared the streets, the protesters cheered. More than 1,000 held an afternoon rally today. Among others, they heard demonstration leader Rennie Davis condemn Mayor Daley and vow to lead more protests against administration policy throughout the presidential campaign. The police department called demonstration leaders communists, and Mayor Daley defended his orders and their actions in breaking up the crowd.
In the heat of emotion and riot, some policemen may have overacted, but to judge the entire police department by the alleged action of a few would be just as unfair as to judge our entire younger generation by the action of this mob. I would like to say here and now that this administration, our administration, and the people of Chicago have never and will condone brutality at any time, but they will never permit a lawless, violent group of terrorists to menace the lives of millions of people, destroy the purpose of this national convention, and take over the streets of Chicago. This is my statement, gentlemen. It speaks for itself.
The standard methods of measuring the success of a mass demonstration, numbers, do not apply to the Chicago movement. Although the protesters gathered no more than 1,000 or two after predicting tens of thousands, they succeeded in attracting, involving, and radicalizing a much larger number of young people in their violent confrontation with the police, and thereby succeeded in strengthening the militant anti-war movement. John Lawrence, CBS News, Chicago.
Vice President Humphrey today denounced what he called stormtrooper tactics in the demonstrations, but he also said that no one can choose the laws they want to abide by. Senators McCarthy and McGovern both condemned the police and troop action, and late this afternoon, McCarthy spoke to a crowd of demonstrators in downtown Chicago.
I think we proved something about the people of this country. They've made a judgment. They made a judgment which the politicians were afraid even to face up to before we took it to the people. Namely, that in the midst of this war, they were ready to say that we were wrong and that the policy ought to be changed. That was the judgment of the people of this country. We got stuck along the way in trying to put it through what we call the political process. Not all the way, but we're stalled right now, but we're really not stopped. We did one or two things at the convention. At least we've done away with the unit rule, which has set free the people of Texas. Now, that's something to do in one convention. But we've not stopped at that point. We're going to continue to carry the issue to popular judgment and hope that that will come to bear upon the nominees of the two parties who are, on the record, subject to some kind of influence. Yes, but not within the parties necessarily, but we're going to try to influence as they go along. But my position is that I do not endorse either one of them.
Tonight, police halted a planned march to the convention hall led by members of the Wisconsin delegation and joined in by hundreds of anti-war protesters. Police later let delegates with convention credentials continue but turned the others back. Tonight, of course, the convention will hear Vice President Humphrey's acceptance speech. Also tonight, a memorial tribute to the late Senator Robert Kennedy. Senator Edward Kennedy and Mrs. Ethel Kennedy will not be here, but they'll introduce the film by closed-circuit television from Hyannisport. And this evening, CBS News White House correspondent Robert Pierpoint learned that President Johnson does not intend to come here from his Texas ranch to be present for this last session of the Democratic National Convention.
No rubbers?
Lost them!
No coat?
Just mailing a letter.
What's a mother to do?
If you take vitamins during this changeable weather, take them deliciously in Total, the vitamin cereal, the only leading cereal with a whole day's vitamin supply. 1 bowl, 1 ounce, gives you 100% of every minimum daily adult vitamin requirement now set by the U.S. government.
You get your vitamins, come what may, when a bowl of Total starts your day.
They came from another planet to conquer Earth. They had a thing that if eaten could keep Earthlings under their spell. They gave it a taste no human could resist. Pizza. They took this pizza taste and turned it into a crunchy, munchy, mouth-sized snack. You could almost taste the cheese, the peppers, even the tomatoes. They named them Pizza Spins. Can humans resist Pizza Spins?
Richard Nixon watched a bit of the Democratic convention on television like all the rest of us, and today I asked his press secretary, Herb Klein, who was watching with him, whether he thinks the Republicans can successfully hang the disorders in Chicago around the neck of Hubert Humphrey.
Well, I don't think you can blame what happened in the streets on Hubert Humphrey. I think this you got to look at as an overall sign of what's happening to the nation today. We're a leaderless nation which is torn by rebellion, both quiet in many minds and also outgoing, as you saw there. In terms of what happened within the convention, I think that Mr. Humphrey has to assume responsibility, because when you turn to the old-line party bosses to run a convention, you're going to have strong-arm action, and that's exactly what he did. It was a Bailey, Daley, Humphrey type of thing which put this thing together.
George Wallace said today he thought the Chicago police acted with restraint and ought to be commended. Wallace blamed the disturbance on those he called ultra-left liberals who threatened the safety of every law-abiding citizen. The president of Czechoslovakia's National Assembly told the people today what already has become evident. Prague will have to bend to Moscow to save Czechoslovakia and avoid a new bloodbath. Such concessions to the Russians have brought a new mood to the Czechoslovak people, as Peter Kalischer reports from Prague.
Bitter resignation is now the prevailing mood in Czechoslovakia after the appeal by Communist Party Chief Dubček to accept indefinite Russian occupation. The monument of King Wenceslas, which for 6 days was the rallying point for defiance, is being scrubbed clean of slogans. The same youths who were insulting the Russians within a stone's throw of their tanks are now busy with a bucket of water. All resistance was centered on support of Dubček and the captive government in Moscow. And now that Dubček is back and imploring the people to bear the unbearable, there is dismay and, for the first time, some disunity.
You're going to continue with resistance, but...
No resistance. No resistance will be here. No resistance.
So, in other words, resignation.
It's all what we can doing.
Thank you.
Sorry, not more. And say all the peoples in the West that very, very sorry in our heart.
Even as the slogans came down, this procession of bitter enders marches slowly across the square. Their banners proclaim, "We have lost freedom, honor, and conscience. In the name of our dead, no compromise." But this is a minority sentiment. In the face of what Dubček calls political reality, the Czechs are going to go along. It is a tragic sight to see a free people losing the freedoms they won so recently. Peter Kalischer, CBS News, Prague.
Former President Eisenhower continues to show progress. His condition is still serious, but from now on, his doctors said, they're going to issue only one daily medical bulletin unless the circumstances change. Prices on the New York Stock Exchange closed mixed today on a volume of almost 11 million shares. The exchange index lost 3 cents. The exchanges said today they will continue to close one day a week next month to let brokers work on their backlog of orders.
This is living. Some people think there's a better way. If you're independent, you set your own style. You don't follow the crowd. You find a better something, including a better tasting cigarette, perhaps. Old Gold Filters. The cigarette for independent people. Old Gold Filters. A delicious mixture of rich tobacco flavors. Flavors that never came through a filter before. Something extra, too. Gift Star coupons.
Gift coupons? They're for her. It's the flavor I'm after. Why smoke them if you can't taste them?
Old Gold Filters. The cigarette for independent people. With Gift Star coupons. Same coupon that comes on fresh-tasting menthol Spring 100s.
Enemy soldiers broke a lull in Vietnam ground fighting last week, and casualty figures released by the U.S. command today show 308 more Americans have died in combat, almost double the figure in the last weekly list. The South Vietnamese said 495 of their men died in action last week, and the number of enemy troops killed was put at 4,755. For the third straight day, ground fighting throughout Vietnam was scattered, and in some cases it was quite heavy today. 2 new battles were reported northwest of Saigon and near the demilitarized zone. Radio Hanoi is calling the latest series of clashes a new general offensive, and in a broadcast today it called on Viet Cong troops and their sympathizers in central Vietnam to hit, destroy, and annihilate the enemy. Enemy gunners carried out a dozen rocket and mortar attacks throughout South Vietnam today. The enemy also is using another weapon, and American armored troops are painfully aware of it. Tony Sargent reports.
American armored vehicles no longer roam the jungles of Vietnam unchallenged. When tanks and armored personnel carriers like these move through hostile terrain, the crew is much aware of the initials RPG, rocket-propelled grenade, a most effective anti-armor weapon the enemy now has in plenty. Army weapons experts have great respect for the RPG.
Greg, what kind of a weapon do we have here?
This, sir, is an RPG-2 rocket launcher. It's an anti-tank weapon.
And how does it operate?
It's a standard trigger firing pin mechanism, sir, as in a 6-shooter, something like this. However, the firing pin is driving up into it this way rather than into a cartridge that way, sir.
All right. Can you put it on the shoulder? Is that how it's fired?
Right, sir. It is a shoulder-fired weapon. With a standard open sighting arrangement, sir, rather than any sort of an optical sight.
And this is fired by one man?
Right, sir. It's a one-man operation. It's not a crew-served weapon.
All right.
And as it is fired, sir, the round comes out, the fins come out, and it's off, sir. Well, this one, sir, is an RPG-7. It's of Chinese Communist manufacture, sir. It's now being used quite extensively in this country.
And what are its advantages over the earlier weapon?
It has quite a few advantages, sir. In one respect, it has the optical sighting arrangement rather than the open sight, sir. The rocket itself has an assist on it that after it comes out of the weapon, the assist rocket cuts in and drives it to about 3 times as fast and as far as the other one, sir.
Right. When the South Vietnamese Army captures the enemy's rocket-propelled grenades, it destroys them on its own weapons ranges. Here is the RPG-2. The more sophisticated RPG-7 is capable of bursting in the air, giving it a slight anti-aircraft capability, useful against helicopters. When the RPG strikes a tank or other armor, it makes a deceptively small hole. But once inside, its explosion can touch off fuel or ammunition, causing virtual destruction of the vehicle. Much of the enemy's advantage in the rocket-propelled grenade lies in its psychological effect on American tank troops. They don't soon forget their contact with the RPG.
I was TC in the tank, and I hit right in the side of the TC cupola up here, and I thought the whole world was blown up. It's pretty bad news. Tear right through anything.
What was it like inside that tank when the RPG hit?
Well, it was terrible. That's all. Like I said, it tears everything up. It melts the steel, it gets molten and throws it all over. So besides being hit with the steel, it's white hot when it hits you and it burns.
I just don't like that weapon when I hear he has it, you know. When they tell us, we get reports that he's carrying these things out in front of us, and don't like to go after him when I know he has them.
Well, how much respect do you have for this enemy weapon?
You have a lot of respect for it, sir. It's the best man-fired weapon VC have.
The inside of one of these tanks used to be among the safest places in Vietnam. But the RPG has changed all that. Tony Sargent, CBS News, Phu Loy, South Vietnam.
Guatemala's government today blamed communist terrorists for the murder yesterday of the United States Ambassador John Gordon Mean. Guatemala began 3 days of national mourning for Mean, and its Congress approved a state of siege. That suspends constitutional limits on search and seizure, and a number of leftists were promptly seized. 10 years ago, Crown Prince Harald of Norway met Sonja Haraldsson. He wooed her and asked permission to marry her. King Olaf frowned because she was a commoner, a shopkeeper's daughter, and the socialist government said no. Recently, a new regime came into power, and today, Harald and Sonja were married, and the bride, who is fatherless, was escorted down the aisle by the king. Virginia Governor Mills Godwin's 14-year-old adopted daughter, Becky, who was seriously injured last Sunday when she was struck by lightning, died today in a hospital at Virginia Beach. She was the Godwins' only child. Eric Severide takes a look at the Democratic vice presidential choice in a moment.
One, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 10 ordinary batteries. Now, just one ever-ready alkaline energizer lasts up to 10 times longer than ordinary batteries. In heavy-duty use, in constant use, in continuous use. Get the golden ones. Golden ever-ready alkaline energizers last up to 10 times longer. That's power to spare.
Hi, honey. When did you fix this sandwich?
Last night, dear.
Seemed like last year. It's hard as my hat.
Richard!
Man from Glad, husband flipping his lid.
Hold on to your hat. Get Glad sandwich bags with a fold lock top. Fold this flap in, this flap over. Fold lock top locks in sandwich, freshness and flavor.
My hat's off to Glad.
Get Glad sandwich bags with a fold lock top from Union Carbide.
This is Eric Severide in Chicago. Hubert Humphrey has chosen in Muskie of Maine a man not much more widely known in the country than Mr. Nixon's man Agnew, but a man tailored to the Humphrey philosophy and one much respected in the United States Senate. Humphrey has not adopted the Southern strategy. Unquestionably, Humphrey wanted Senator Edward Kennedy as his first choice for obvious reasons. For obvious reasons, Kennedy refused. Fairly certainly, the Kennedy brother-in-law, Sergeant Shriver, was his second choice. Shriver was willing and able, but the Kennedy clan was opposed. The brother-in-law went to Paris as ambassador rather than join Robert Kennedy's spring campaign, and the Kennedyites were alarmed at the prospect of a popular Shriver standing in the way of Ted Kennedy 4 years from now. The stubborn will of many men, not candidates, had much to do with the overall outcome of this convention. President Johnson, who demanded a hardline Vietnam plank in the platform, McCarthy leaders who preferred the issue and the floor fight to any compromise, Mayor Daley, who was determined that this convention come to this city and who promised order, hardcore leaders of the youthful rioters who were determined upon a confrontation with the police, many of whom overreacted with savagery. The true believers among the Kennedy holdovers who wanted a Ted Kennedy build-up here, if not his nomination, just as was done with John Kennedy in the 56th convention with 1960 in mind. And Hubert Humphrey, the happy man of goodwill, inherits this unhappy, snarling nest of ill will. Tonight, he will try to apply the first bandages to the wounds, to give his party a vitamin shot while trying to soothe it at the same time. He has prepared himself for this for many years for this moment, but it has come to him now by reason of the Johnson abdication. Humphrey is a man constantly thinking and speaking about the future, but the immediate past is a heavy weight as he runs. He must try to fasten the mind of his party and of all the people on the proposition that the Vietnam War will end, and that then all the other terrible domestic problems will remain, and that he can deal with them more effectively than the Republican opposition. Charles?
With Walter Cronkite, this is Charles Kuralt. Good night.
What causes my heartburn, my indigestion?
In your stomach, excess acid may build, and build can cause acid indigestion, heartburn, that burning sensation. But Rolaids, with its exclusive buffering compound, has thousands of absorbent particles. Each consumes 47 times its weight in excess stomach acid, gives fast, lasting relief. Rolaids consumes 47 times its weight in excess stomach acid.
You know, this is the biggest reunion yet, Myrtle.
How many grandchildren for you, Len?
There's Jenny for fifth. You know, she doesn't warm up to me, though. Acts like I had bad breath.
I have the answer to that, Len. Listerine. It kills germs that can cause bad breath and lasts for hours.
I'll give her a whirl.
Looks like Granddad's pretty popular now.
That's sure doing, Myrtle.
Well, Listerine helped.
Listerine antiseptic kills germs, keeps breath fresh for hours.
This has been the CBS Evening News with Walter Cronkite at Democratic headquarters in Chicago and Charles Kuralt in New York. Stay tuned for CBS News continuous coverage.